It takes all kinds of people from all walks of life to build a town, but when we think of Richmond, Indiana's earliest settlers, we often think of Quakers. Today, Richmond, along with Philadelphia and London, is one of the three most important cities in the world to Quakers. But who are the Quakers, and why did they come to Richmond? The Religious Society of Friends, more commonly known as Quakers, are a Protestant denomination founded by George Fox in England in the mid-1600s. William Penn, founder of Pennsylvania, was responsible for leading a large Quaker migration from England to Pennsylvania in 1681. Long-standing Quaker principles espoused by William Penn include peace, democracy, and freedom. Many of the early Quakers who came to Richmond were farmers who left their homes in the South because they were against slavery and because they were in search of better land and economic opportunity. Quaker pioneers arrived in Richmond in the early 1800s. Quaker names such as David Hoover, John Smith, and Jeremiah Cox are recognized by local school children and history buffs alike. David Hoover was born in Randolph County, North Carolina in 1781 and came to what is now Richmond in February or March of 1806. Impressed with the availability of water, trees, rock for building material, and the beauty of the area, he went back to Ohio and told his father Andrew that he thought he had found what they were looking for. David, his father, and others soon returned to Richmond to live. A few months after David Hoover's arrival, John Smith, also a Quaker, acquired property in several areas of Richmond, including land that is south of Main Street. In the memoir written late in his life, David Hoover describes Smith as a spare-built man nearly 6 feet in height. He was gentlemanly and courteous in his manners, and would give a general or other officer their titles in conversation. It was unusual for Quakers to use titles in those days. Hoover goes on to say that Smith had a small dry goods and grocery store and became wealthy by selling his land. In the fall of 1806, Jeremiah Cox, another Quaker from North Carolina, arrived in Richmond and bought land in what is now considered the northern part of town. David Hoover's memoir describes Cox as the Solomon of the first settlement, implying that he was a wise man of good judgment. Hoover goes on to say that Cox was rising 6 feet and of a sound constitution. Cox could work iron or tin, but was considered most skilled at building mills. David Hoover's memoir also indicates that he laid out the city of Richmond under the guidance of Smith and Cox. Later, Hoover and others were asked to select a name for the new town. While several names were considered, Hoover said that he prevailed and chose the name Richmond. The History of Wayne County, Indiana, written by Andrew W. Young in 1872, says that while Richmond came to be considered a town about the time John Smith laid out lots on several streets south of Main, the area was not incorporated until 1818, when the Fox addition was added and citizens voted for incorporation. Hoover, Smith, and Cox were leaders in the Quaker community as well as in the Richmond community. Their presence and influence were instrumental in the migration of Quakers from throughout the South to Richmond. Other well-known friends in Richmond's history include Robert Morrison, who provided money for the Morrison Reeves Library. Robert Morrison was born in North Carolina in 1786. And came to Richmond with the migration of Friends in 1810. He didn't have much money to start, but worked hard at a variety of jobs and eventually helped to establish what became the Citizens Bank. Robert Morrison was known to contribute generously to local charitable organizations, but is best remembered for giving $12,000 to buy land for and build the original library in Richmond, and for providing $5,000 to purchase books. The original library was torn down in 1975, and a new one opened at the same location a year later. Artifacts from the old library have been thoughtfully incorporated into the present structure, which is still called the Morrison Reeves Library. Another well-known Richmond Quaker was the artist Marcus Mote. Marcus Mote was born near West Milton, Ohio in 1817 and was known for his landscapes, still life paintings and portraits, some of which he painted in what is now known as the Golden Lamb Restaurant and Inn in Lebanon, Ohio. Marcus Mote moved to Richmond in 1864, where he completed many paintings including those entitled Indiana Yearly Meeting of Friends and Call It the Sign of the Old Grey Goose. In addition to his paintings, Marcus Mote is remembered for starting an art academy and for convincing local schools to include art instruction for students. Not all of the early Quaker leaders were men. Because of the Quaker dedication to democracy and equality, women have had leadership roles in the denomination for a long, long time. Rhoda Johnson Coffin, who moved to Richmond in 1847 upon her marriage to banker Charles Coffin, was a Friends minister in 1866. In addition to her work within the Quaker community, Rhoda Johnson Coffin was known internationally for her work in prison reform. In the 1860s, men, women, and children all shared the same prison quarters. Rhoda Johnson Coffin organized a reform effort to establish separate facilities for female prisoners and a reformatory for children in Indiana. She succeeded and was ultimately named the president of the board of directors for the women's prison. Another area where we can see the influence of Quakers is in some of the structures in Richmond. In addition to imposing places such as EARLHAM College, which was founded by Quakers, and the Quaker meeting houses in the area, there are beautiful old Quaker homes that have been successfully adapted for new uses today. One example of the adaptive reuse of a Quaker home is the Quaker Hill Conference Center, located at number 10 Quaker Hill Drive, just off of Route 27 and south of I-70. Quaker Hill is a retreat and conference center that offers hospitality and programs to families, businesses, community organizations, and religious groups of all faiths. Quaker Hill Conference Center has an interesting history, first as a home and currently as a retreat. What is now called Quaker Hill Conference Center was built in 1855 by Isaac P. Evans as a home for his second wife, Mary Ann Buffum Evans. Isaac P. Evans, born in 1821, was a Quaker whose family migrated to Ohio, then Richmond, from South Carolina in the early 1800s. Isaac P. Evans owned a linseed mill with his brother-in-law Joseph Burson. The mill was located near what is now the intersection of Sim Hodgins and Chester Boulevard. In 1861, Evans left the linseed business in Richmond and started the Evans Linseed Oil Company with his half-brothers in Indianapolis. He kept the house in Richmond and later reopened the original mill and worked there until he died in 1882. There are stories, difficult to verify, that fugitive slaves were hidden at the mill. The bricks for the Evans house were made nearby and wood used inside was cut from trees on the property. The home is a 2.5-story rectangular Italianate house. A porch was added in the 1890s, as was a 2-story addition. The porch from the 1890s was removed in the 1940s and a new porch, complete with Doric columns, was added. Despite the somber expressions on their faces in portraits, both Isaac P. and Mary Ann Evans were known as gracious hosts who opened their home on many occasions. For years, the house was a center for friends' gatherings, especially during yearly meetings when 25 to 30 people were housed at a time. Isaac and Mary Ann Evans were also remembered for hosting Christmas parties for teenagers in their meeting. Lanterns decorated the drive to the house, and a good time was had by all. After the death of Isaac P. and Mary Ann Evans, the house changed hands within the family several times. By 1939, the house was in a state of serious disrepair. Accounts describe tenants who stored hay in the parlor and fed pigs in the kitchen. Eventually, the house was lost to the bank. That same year, Isaac E. Woodard, a grandson of Isaac P. and Mary Ann Evans, bought the house in response to an initiative by the Friends World Committee to support a service ideal in the Midwest. Woodard also purchased 25 acres of land around the house and began the process to incorporate what became the Quaker Hill Foundation to support the philanthropic, cultural, social service, religious, and educational objectives of Quaker Hill. One of the first service projects at Quaker Hill started in 1939, when the Friends World Committee sought to establish a hostel in Richmond for European refugees fleeing the Nazis. The staff at Quaker Hill and people in the community helped the refugees, who were called guests, learn English and find jobs. While living at Quaker Hill, the guests had to perform 3 hours of work each day. Tasks included housekeeping, working in the garden, fields, or shop. In the afternoon, guests studied English and U.S. history. The hostel lasted 14 months, and 55 guests passed through during that time. During a renovation on the 3rd floor of Quaker Hill, boxes of journals written by guests were found. Another major service initiative started in June of 1941 and lasted through July of that year, when Quaker Hill served as a civilian public service camp. The National Service and Training Act of 1940 contained provisions that permitted conscientious objectors who were drafted to perform an alternative service during the war. 12 conscientious objectors came to the camp at Quaker Hill, and plans were made to expand the group to 125. However, it proved difficult to raise the funds needed for a larger facility, and the 12 people were transferred to another location, and the camp at Quaker Hill was closed. At various times, Quaker Hill was also used as a day camp and as a rural life association. The dormitory built to house the conscientious objectors at Quaker Hill stood for years. Here, the dormitory is being used by another group. Eventually, the dorm, built as a temporary facility, was torn down, and the Woodard Lodge stands in its place today. Quaker Hill's history of service and hospitality has continued throughout the years. Today, visitors may attend lectures, discussions, musical events, weddings, or showers in the grand double parlor. The room is set up theater style for larger groups and easily rearranged for small groups. This was the original dining room in the Evans house. A photo from the Quaker Hill archive shows guests eating here when the center was used as a hostel for refugees. The Evans house has 7 bedrooms with 18 additional bedrooms in the Woodard Lodge. In all, there is room for up to 50 overnight guests. This renovated 3rd floor room is perfect for reading, studying, meditating, or looking out the window at the trees. In addition to the house and lodge, the conference center offers outdoor spaces. There is a picnic shelter, an amphitheater, and 20 wooded acres to explore. Quaker Hill has evolved from a private home to a stable business. Yet after more than 150 years, Quaker Hill Conference Center is, in one sense, what it has always been: a haven, a place to meet, think, talk, study, work, and be with friends. Wayne County Historical Museum, located at 1150 North A Street, is a highly regarded museum and favored visiting place for Richmond residents and tourists. But how many people know that the museum was originally a Quaker meeting house? The museum is another example of an historic Quaker building being successfully adapted for a new use. The Hicksite Friends Meeting House was built in 1865 and today is listed on the National Register. This picture shows the new meeting house before the front porch and steps were added. Architect George Hoover's handwritten specifications detail almost every aspect of the building, from the depth of the pews to the kind of glass to be used in the windows. There are repeated references to the use of good quality material and good processes. The interior of the meeting house shows most rows of pews facing forward, with several rows up front for elders whose pews face the members of the meeting. The room is notable for its simplicity and for the sliding panels that descend from the ceiling to separate men and women. This group photo shows the membership of the meeting in front of the meeting house around 1896. A smaller group of Quakers from the Hicksite meeting, also taken around 1896, includes William Webster Folk of Spring Grove, first row, second from left, and Joseph Ratliff, front row, far right. Both men were merchants in Richmond. By 1929, the membership of the Hicksite meeting had decreased significantly, and the decision was made to sell the property. At about the same time, Society matron Julia Meek Garr, wife of William Wallace Garr, was looking for a place to house her considerable collections. Like other wealthy women of her day, she traveled the world and brought back a vast array of antiques, artifacts, and collectibles. Having filled her apartment at the Westgate Hotel and filled a gallery at the Morton High School, she still needed more room and decided that the Hicksite Meeting House would meet her requirements. Julia Meek Garr purchased the land on which the Hicksite Friends Meeting House stood for $30,000. The members of the meeting gave her the meeting house that stood on the land. Julia expected that the county commission would buy the land and building from her and turn it into a museum. However, the year was 1930, and in the midst of the Great Depression, the county did not have the money to acquire the property. The county did agree to make an annual grant to the museum, and that support continues today. In addition, the museum depends on membership dues, admission fees, donations, bequests, gift shop sales, and many hours of help from dedicated volunteers. Initially, the museum was supported by well-to-do citizens in the area, and Julia Meek Garr was not shy about asking for donations. The story goes that when the more affluent members of the community were walking down the street and they saw Julia coming, they crossed to the other side. They knew she would ask for money or something from their home she thought would add to the museum, or an item they could acquire for her on their next trip abroad. Julia Meek Garr was 71 when she started the museum in its current location, and she volunteered there for 15 years. She was the unpaid director from 1930 until she died in 1944. During her tenure, she expected every school class in Wayne County to visit the museum 4 times each year. She wanted the children to be well informed and to see the new and changing exhibits. Julia's influence on the museum was so great that it was called the Julia Meek Garr Wayne County Historical Museum for years. After her death, her friend and traveling companion Anne Lau succeeded her as unpaid museum director for 13 years. Until about 1973, the director continued to be a volunteer. While the exhibits at the museum have changed and improved over the years, so has the staging of the exhibits. This old photograph shows an eclectic mixture of items ranging from a portrait of George Washington to a series of plates and a case of women's clothing. Now the museum is systematically organized around themes and collections, such as this collection of cameras. Here we see a beautiful Maria Blackware pot, perched precariously on top of a delicate stand where it could accidentally be knocked off by a passerby. Fortunately, the pot survived and can currently be seen on display in a secure case. In the past, ancient and fragile artifacts such as the museum's mummy were exposed to sunlight and uncontrolled temperatures. Now the mummy is professionally displayed in a windowless room in an air-conditioned facility. Some of Julia Meek-Gar's exhibits, such as the natural history items shown here, were a better fit with the Joseph Moore Museum at Earlham College and were moved there. In return, the Joseph Moore Museum sent items more appropriate to the Wayne County Historical Museum. Some impromptu displays, such as this collection of shoes from around the world shown on the front steps of the museum, are a thing of the past. Yet many of the interesting items acquired by Julia Meek-Gar remain at the museum today, such as the head of Buddha, purchased from a man in Dublin, Indiana, that rises unexpectedly from a flower bed on the front lawn. The Wayne County Historical Museum is one of the oldest museums in the country. When the museum opened, there were about 400 museums in the United States, and today the number is closer to 15,000. The Wayne County Historical Museum is the most visited attraction in Richmond, with between 11,000 and 12,000 visitors a year, including approximately 4,200 school children from across Indiana and Ohio. Museum exhibits include historic cars built by some of the 14 auto manufacturers once located in Richmond, a functioning 1880s-era blacksmith shop that is situated next to the museum's livery stable, a collection of Native American artifacts, some of which were found locally, and a two-story log home where Richmond residents Solomon and Hannah Dickinson lived with their 9 children around 1823. Every year the museum sponsors much anticipated special events such as a late summer heritage festival, a cemetery history tour, and a Christmas festival. The people of Wayne County are indeed fortunate to have such an elegant and interesting museum housed in an architecturally and historically significant building. The Wayne County Historical Museum was once described as a miniature Smithsonian, New York Metropolitan, and Williamsburg all rolled into one. It doesn't get much better than that. Earlham College is a private 4-year residential school known nationally as an outstanding liberal arts institution. Earlham was founded by Quakers in 1847 and today has over 1,100 students. 15% of the students are from other countries. In addition to its liberal arts programs, Earlham includes the School of Religion, called ESR, an accredited graduate theological seminary in the Quaker tradition. The Barclay Center at Earlham College, part of the School of Religion, is another good example of an old Quaker structure serving the community in new ways in the 21st century. The Barclay Center, located at 228 College Avenue, is a brick federal-style house with a cupola. It is the oldest house on the street. Hugh Maxwell, a Quaker farmer, developer, and entrepreneur, built the house. Original records for the house were lost in a fire, so the exact year of construction is not clear, but is estimated to be between 1860 and 1871. Maxwell bought the land referred to as the Maxwell Edition in records from the Quakers Indiana Yearly Meeting, which sold it and other lots at a time when the meeting was trying to raise money to establish Earlham College. There was a close relationship between Hugh Maxwell and Earlham College. For several years, Hugh Maxwell was a member of the committee for the Quaker boarding school that predated Earlham, as was his second wife, Miriam Coffin Rambo Maxwell. Miriam Maxwell was a Quaker who migrated to Indiana from North Carolina in 1824. Between 1874 and 1876, Maxwell sold off lots from his farm to other prominent Quakers, such as Joseph Moore, after whom Earlham's Museum of Natural Science is named, Marmaduke Lewis, and Erastus Test. And for several years, Maxwell rented his own home to Phineas and Ruth Mather. Phineas allowed male students from Earlham to board there. When Hugh and Miriam Maxwell moved to Kansas in 1881, they sold the house and several lots to Wayne County for use as an orphanage. Earlham College purchased the Maxwell house around the turn of the 20th century. For a while, it was used to house college students. Later, it became the home of 3 Earlham presidents, Robert L. Kelly, David M. Edwards, and William C. Dennis, shown here. This picture of Quaker leaders attending a New Year's Day gathering at the house shows a porch on the College Avenue side. In 1949, D. Elton and Pauline Trueblood moved in. They removed the porch. D. Elton Trueblood, who lived from 1900 to 1994, was a Quaker author and theologian who moved to Richmond to help rebuild Earlham College after World War II. The Truebloods sold the house to Earlham around 1953. The house later became part of the Earlham School of Religion, which was founded by Trueblood and others in 1960. D. Elton Trueblood, a biographer of Robert Barclay, who in the 1600s wrote what is still considered to be the rationale for the Quaker faith, was instrumental in naming the house the Barclay Center. In the 1970s, single students lived upstairs and ESR classes were held downstairs. In the 1980s, the stone building at the corner of College Avenue and the historic National Road was built to house classes for the ESR, and the Barclay Center was turned into offices for the Earlham School of Religion, and so it remains today. While the exterior of the Barclay Center looks much as it did when Hugh Maxwell built it, the inside has been converted to meet the needs of a contemporary office environment. By looking at this office, or this conference room, you would not know that you were in a house built in the 1800s. Strict preservationists might regret the loss of original elements of the interior, but many others will applaud the fact that this grand house is still here and is an active part of Earlham. We've seen 3 examples of Quaker structures repurposed for modern needs. These structures, all constructed in the 19th century, were built to last, and they have. We have also seen a brief overview of how Quakers have contributed to Richmond and Wayne County since the early 1800s, and the Quaker tradition of service will no doubt continue to benefit the community for years to come.